All right, Lucas, we're back at it. Episode 112. And we're going right back into the book club.
Right. I just want to give everyone a disclaimer here. I know last week when we opened this up, we said we were probably going to do them every other week. Nathan and I got busy. We tried finding a guest last minute. Didn't work out. So,
well, we have a guest who's confirmed coming on the show. It's just hard to coordinate.
Yeah. Exactly. So we said, why not jump into more reticulated Python information with the Complete Reticulated Python book club that we are doing.
Yeah, and I will add that guest is reticulated Python oriented. Yeah.
Yeah. So good thing for the Retic Lounge is we have a lot of good reticulated Python content for the foreseeable future.
Luke, you're welcome. I just want to give out a shout out to not only just Luke, but our entire Discord and Patreon family. If you guys want to join the best Retic Discord out there, we do meetings every couple weeks, early access, and a bunch more over on our Discord. The link is below.
Yeah, and speaking of Discord members, we've had, since we started the book club, we've had several people on our Discord buy the book just because they don't want to fall behind on the book club. For those of you that are following along, again, this is a book club, so get the Complete Reticulated Python. As a matter of fact, we'll probably start adding the Amazon link.
I meant to do that last week, so I'll put that in retroactively, and then there'll be one in this episode as well.
I just want to give a forewarning that, like, there is so much, like, as Nathan and I have been outlining and going into detail for this book, there is so much good information that it's impossible for us to cover all of it in detail. So guys, this podcast is not, this book club is definitely not a replacement for this book. So please, if you guys are a reticulated Python owner, keeper, support Glenn, support Russ. It's a phenomenal book. And even just for the images alone, it's worth the price of buying it.
I will say pretty confidently that, after getting just 4 chapters deep, some 60 pages, this is the most dense information I've ever read about reticulated pythons.
Snakes in general.
Snakes in general. I mean, definitely the pythons of the world gets pretty deep into it, but it's jumping species to species pretty quick. But yeah, just one species. Well, I guess more than one species, right? But focusing in on one snake. Yeah, this is 400 pages of dense information that we could not possibly start to fully cover on the podcast. So swing over there, buy a copy. This is going to be one that you just want in your collection just to show off in the future.
One thing I will say about today, Nathan, I don't know about you, but chapter 3 is Origins of MR Jampeanus and Insular MR Saputrai, and chapter 4 is on Insular Dwarfism. There's a lot of information that is vital to understanding about the history of snakes in general and Insular Dwarfism. So I don't know about you, Nathan, but I think it's important to have a lot of that background information. And so I'm kind of going deep this week. I took a lot of notes, and I'm excited to kind of jump in.
Yeah, I think you saw kind of my notes and saw that I got to have fun with it here and there. But yeah, I'm excited to get into it as well. Also, just wanted to do a quick shout out for the YouTube algorithm. Give us a like, comment, share that. It just helps us get viewed by new people. So if you could do that, it would help the Retic Lounge out a lot. I don't know why I'm stumbling on words tonight.
It's okay. And if you guys have already been subscribed but haven't already done so, hit the notification bell. That's going to let you know every Friday when we release an episode. And yeah, that'll keep you up to date. You'll get notified on when we release the episode, and you'll be able to tap and watch it. But Nathan, do you want to, why don't you start us off chapter 3 with reading the quote? Whether you've poured your heart and soul into your reptile business or you've just begun your business journey, AE Foundry has you covered with next level expertise in graphic design, motion graphics, videography, photography, and so much more. If you've been dying for a new logo for your reptile business, motion graphics for your current logo, a new website, or need assistance making your video podcast come to life, then listen carefully. AE Foundry's mission places storytelling at its core. AE Foundry believes that a distinctive story and background are the driving forces that set your brand apart. In today's market, consumers seek more than just products. They crave a connection built on trust with the brands they cherish. AE Foundry is committed to empowering small businesses and fostering authenticity that resonates with their consumers. Reach out to them and let them help you craft a visual narrative that helps establish a genuine and lasting connection with your audience. To contact AE Foundry, email them at aromero@aefoundry.com or on Instagram @AEFoundry. When it comes to housing your retics, trust me, you're going to want an enclosure that will be just as strong and durable as your reticulated python. The Heartland Reptile Enclosure is next level tough and will outlive you and your retic by several generations. Heartland Reptile Enclosures are designed and manufactured out of powder-coated aluminum to provide the highest quality and longevity available in the reptile enclosure. What makes them even better is they are lighter than your PVC and plastic enclosures out there and are extremely tough. Stop playing around with plastic enclosures for your large constrictors and step up your enclosure game with the Heartland Reptile Enclosure. To inquire about one of these enclosures, speak to Jordan himself at Heartland Reptiles on Instagram, Facebook, and on TikTok. Here on TRL, we preach about the importance of using hooks, feeding tongs, and other tools with your reticulated python all the time. Animal Equipment by Stoney not only has all the tools you need for any snake you keep, but they have the absolute best hooks on the market. What sets Animal Equipment by Stoney's hooks apart from the other guys is their polycarbonate hook ends that provide a warm feel that won't disturb or bother your retic, ensuring a positive interaction from the get-go. Since 2008, AE Stoney has been supplying zoos, herpetologists, and other animal professionals with their tools. It's time for you to step your hook game up and buy an AE Stoney hook. To learn more and purchase one of their amazing products, visit aestoney.com.
Pretty quick one here. So, Life Finds a Way. Dr. Ian Malcolm, 1993.
Yeah, in Life Finds a Way, I think, goes really deep into what the chapter, I think, is outlined and about. And so it talks about the origins, where these animals came from, and it goes all the way back into the history of the first snake fossil, all that good stuff. It goes into how reticulated pythons and other species migrated into different lands and different areas, where snakes were first originally found, how they evolved, and whether they evolved from, terrestrial or marine life. There's kind of a debate there. So a lot of good information that we're about to jump into. But the first thing that I wanted to do was kind of just, I want to start off by reading just the first paragraph real quickly. So Glenn writes here, the sands of time have to be turned far back to understand how MR Jampeanus and Insular MR Saputrai came to be. They did not magically arise one day in their dwarfed form. Instead, they arose over millions of years through evolutionary pressures and drastically changing geography. So that just kind of really sets up the chapter for how far back we're going to really dig into how MR Saputrai and MR Jampeanus really came to be.
You want to quickly just go over what MR would be for people that may just be tuning in for the first episode of the book club?
Right. If you guys are just tuning in for the first episode, go back. But MR stands for Malaeopython reticulatus. So just to recap real quick, 3 different species of reticulated python. There's Malaopython reticulatus. There's Malaopython reticulatus saputrai and Malaopython reticulatus jampeanus. All right. So first thing that I have kind of outlined, Nathan, is I want to discuss this kind of first note that I underlined here, but snakes had to arise from somewhere. They don't just magically appear according to science, and the evolutionary history is complete and changes frequently with the discovery of new fossils. So there's stuff that are constantly changing, but I underlined here, unlike many other species, there is an extremely limited fossil record of early transitional snakes because snakes are a relative modern species, and the environment that early snakes lived in was not ideal for fossilizations. There are still many questions regarding their origin. So tell me how, and I think I may be even jumping a little bit, but I find it so hard to believe that we have so many fossils of dinosaurs, of things that no one has ever seen, but yet with snakes, you heard that, Seent?
Yeah.
Is that what you're laughing about, Seent? Yeah, I saw you smirk, asshole. It kind of makes sense to think about why it's probably hard to find snake fossils, and it's because the majority of their body is rib cages and vertebrae that are pretty small in nature, right?
The vertebra is what I found out later in the chapter, and what I've seen in other shows, like the Titanoboa thing comes to mind, but those are the only fossils they're really finding, and it's really hard to identify what species they really came from.
Right. I think that when it comes to looking at the fossils and looking at the species and their anatomy, probably a lot more fragile, broken apart. But let's get into a little bit about how the scientific community views how the modern snake evolved. I found early on in the reading, and it seems pretty clear that they likely evolved from lizards. It's the strongest theory that's out there right now, by observing snake feeding on social insects and their larvae, their reduced eyes, modified jaws, imbricated cycloid body scales. There's a lot that mimic the behavior and the anatomy and physiology of lizards. And I guess where, Glenn talks about in the book, citing some research, is really about like ancient lizards related to monitors basically adopted a burrowing mode of life, tunneling through loose dirt or sand, as do a number of lizard species today. In this manner, several features characteristics of snakes evolved, such as the reduction and eventual loss of limbs and external ears, and the development of a spectacle to protect the eyes while moving through the earth. So that beautiful eye cap that we see in sheds. It makes sense, right?
Makes sense. And while I was reading that, I was like, my retic doesn't really burrow, but
right. And I think that was something cool that Glenn outlined on here.
Yeah.
Was the fact that they eventually became so evolved that, as they stopped burrowing and came out, that they were whole enough as a species to be able to survive outside of the ground. So I'm curious. I don't know if you saw on here, but there was kind of a debate factor. There were two overriding beliefs of experts in the field.
Of where they came from, if they're terrestrial or marine or origin. Yeah.
So marine origin. So like what I think about with that, like, I don't know if you've seen the Apple TV series on dinosaurs.
I have. I've never had Apple TV, so no.
Dude, Apple TV Plus has by far the most accurate, realistic viewpoint of dinosaurs. And they did it with such phenomenal CGI. It looks insane. But there are massive reptile species that live underwater. So when I was reading this and I saw that an argument was marine, I first thought like that doesn't sound plausible, but like literally as we're talking now, I thought about that docuseries and was like, well, I guess it can be if like they referred to them as like aquatic reptiles or marine reptiles. Kind of sounds like a super soldier marine core machine robot snake animal. But I was just flying there. I didn't know what was coming next. I just said words.
I know. I was just waiting to see where that one landed.
But yeah, I found it interesting. But I think that as I was continuing to read through the book, in finding that they exhibit a lot of the behaviors that lizards do, that it seems pretty confirmed that the general scientific community can hypothesize that they came from lizards.
Yeah, it says modern studies have revealed that transition from lizards to snakes almost certainly occurred terrestrially, specifically fossilorally. This was shown by transitional snakes feeding on social insects and their larvae, as you mentioned, having highly reduced eyes, uniquely modified jaws, and smooth and deeply imbricated cycloid body scales, which are exclusively fossorial habits.
Right. So now let's get into the next kind of portion of this chapter that talks about like when snakes were believed to first arrive. Like I said, this book goes deep back. Like it's not just like reticulated pythons were discovered. No, like it's going back to 167 million years ago. 167 years ago is when
not years, million years.
Yeah, 160. Yeah, just 167 years. Such a long time ago. But that's when it is believed by evolutionary biologists that the first snakes arose. So 167 million years ago. And early on, snakes were divided into two groups. So those two groups were divided into two groups of squamates, I should say. So Pan-Serpentis and crown snakes, which is just Serpentis. And just to give you like a brief overview of the difference between the two, Pan-Serpentis covered what's known as the modern day snake, but also snake-like reptiles, so probably lizards and other reptiles. Whereas the crown snake, known as Serpentis, is just referring to like what we know as the modern day snake. So,
I wonder if that included like eels way back then.
That's actually a really good point to where like the marine theory could possibly derive from. Now, I would imagine that if that were a strong case, that eels would have to have shown up earlier than snakes, but that's a good point. I never even thought of that.
I just wonder if they ever fell into that Pan-Serpentis.
Right, snake-like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it be quite possible. So yeah, there's two different, back then, two different main categories, the Pan-Serpentis and the crown snakes, which is what we know as the modern day snakes. And it's believed that pythons originated in, let's see if I can pronounce
Laurasia?
Yeah, Laurasia, right? So for those of you that don't know, I had to do a little bit of Google searching. And then what's funny is after I did the Google searching, it came later in the chapter. So I was like, oh, I didn't even need to do this. But Laurasia is what's referred to as like the supercontinent that was located in the northern hemisphere. Now, real quick, before we go into like what was more discovered later, when you read that, and you saw that snakes came from the northern hemisphere of the earth.
So, yeah, North America, Greenland, Baltica, modern Europe, north of the Trans-European Suture Zone, and west of the Ural Mountains, and Siberia.
What did you think? Like when you read that originally at first, like, did you think that was correct?
No, because like you think North America and you go, all right, we don't have pythons here that originated here.
Right. And then I also think of like where the vast majority of so many snake species and reptiles in general are in like the Asia area, south of the equator. And, it didn't make sense to me. And as you continue reading, you find out that there was some debate and idea of where they came from. And it seems like the general consensus is that they came from them being from like the Asia area and that lower area. It makes sense climate wise, fauna, all that good stuff. So yeah, no, when I was reading that at first, I was like, that seems wrong.
But the oldest python fossil found at the time of the writing is a 47 million year old fossil snake called Mesolopython freyi. And that's from modern Germany.
Yeah. Which is, well, yeah, I mean, and that's mind blowing to me. And again, it just goes to show that, like, I don't know, maybe there are fossils out there in other areas that could be older, right? But that first one to be found in Germany. But the fossils suggest a European early middle Eocene for the origin of Pythonidae. So 47 million years. You ever wonder about the theory of like how the hell do people have a science to break down how old fossils are? How does that work?
Carbon dating.
Cool. Math. Like
that's what the History Channel has told me, at least.
Right. And it just, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. Like it's such a mind-blowing science.
Yeah. It's pretty wild that we can even somewhat accurately pinpoint how old something is pretty wild. But then even you see stuff like that debated. I mean, look at the Sphinx. Some will debate that the erosion around the base of the Sphinx suggests that it's way older than it is.
Right. So, and again, this is important stuff for, I think, all snake people, but there's a part of the chapter that goes on beyond. So the next section of this chapter on page 40 goes into the history of.
I think we're jumping ahead a little bit just because we talked about the oldest python fossil, but we didn't really get into the oldest boa fossil.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, just for the sake of like this being a reticulated python book, there's a lot of information there, but why don't we just share those like snippets and pinpoints for the oldest boa fossil?
It's 50.2 million years old.
So older.
Yeah, just a little bit older. The person that was responsible for that dating said it could also go back an additional 15 million years, so about 64 million.
Carbon dating. It's wild.
And then I also want to add that they both coexisted in Europe, both boas and pythons at one point.
Right.
So I think that's worth not just skimming over for sure.
Yeah, I think, so I mean, boa typically are found in South America, Africa, Madagascar, India, Zealandia, and Antarctica. This is going to sound really stupid right now. People are going to be listening and be like, y'all are idiots. Sorry to make you look bad, Nathan, but are there current places where pythons and boas coexist? Help me out.
It says now that Boidae and Pythonidae largely do not reside in concurrent regions. I don't know why I said it like that. An early shaped geographic location for the two families is of note. Okay,
so they did share geographic location at one point, but right now it does not happen.
So does that mean it does, though, still happen.
Maybe. I feel like if it did, like what Glenn had put it, let us know, Glenn.
But why would he says largely do not reside? Why wouldn't he just say it does? They flat out don't. Well, I guess I don't know.
Because black and white is not a good look.
You know what? Go on to page 40. I'm gonna look into it.
Well, no, I'm kind of curious. I mean, and please, guys, if you're listening, drop in the comments. I'm trying to think. Like, so we go to the Amazon rainforest and we're in South America. Any pythons exist in South America?
Nope.
Nope.
Not here in the U.S.
No, besides the Florida python, but that's invasive.
But that can we count that? I mean, I guess we can.
But if we can, there's also
maybe that's why he put largely do not reside in the same concurrent area.
But I can also make an argument.
I could see that being a little bit of Glenn humor for sure.
Right. I can also make an argument though that like although there are boas in North America, they are nowhere near Florida.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
Which is a very far geographic range when we're talking about like some of the islands that we're going to be talking about for retics in Indonesia.
Well, and I guess you could say Puerto Rico now too is boas and pythons.
Did you say Mexico?
Puerto Rico?
Puerto Rico, invasive.
It's still, I know.
But they can live, I guess, in the same climates if they get there unintentionally, right?
I guess so. Madagascar, maybe? No.
Madagascar would be a crazy place.
They're absent. They're absent from the pythons are absent from the Americas and in Madagascar. So maybe somewhere in the South Pacific.
Okay.
All
right. Let's go on to page 40 because I really like this aspect of the book.
Oh, yes. This is I actually have something for this and might as well just bring it up while you start.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the so I basically have a note here. I'm going to read part of the book real quick. Following the Cretaceous Paleogen KPG extinction event 66 million years ago, which, by the way, for those of you that don't know, and I'll probably read it on here, that was the same thing that took out the dinosaurs. Snakes are thought to have moved into Asia for the first time. So what ended up happening is in the aftermath of KPG extinction resulted in the disappearance of numerous species, including dinosaurs, and created an ecological void that allowed for the rapid diversification and radiation of various vertebrates, notably mammals, in addition to snakes. So real quick before I go any further, we talked about the oldest history of fossils and everything, and now we're going into the widespread evolutionary process and also just like environmental spread and ecological spread and how the snakes did that. So when KPG happened, there was a massive void in the ecological system, which allowed for these animals to rapidly diversify and split off into different groups. And I want to say that it wasn't until, here, let me read. It wasn't until 38 to 45 million years ago that Pythonidae reached Asia, and 23 million years ago that they reached Papua, which is, Papua New Guinea area and Australia area. So that happened, that happened 38 to 45 million years ago, and 23. It's funny because Glenn writes it like it wasn't that long ago, but we're still referencing 23 million years ago.
Hey, I mean, we're referencing 167 a couple pages ago.
Right, exactly. So there you go. That's perspective.
Yep.
So I want to make note of an image, and I know that we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I thought it was a really beautiful image. Actually, no, not going to jump ahead. We'll wait because that's a whole different eruption. So go for it. You said you want to bring something up and make note.
Let's see. So over the last 2.5 million years, during the Quaternary period, the Sunda shelf oscillated between being flooded and exposed. Yes, Lucas.
What page is that on?
40.
40. Oh yeah. Okay, we're getting there. I wanted to talk about So basically, real quick before we get into that, because I have a few notes on that as well. But so we're now coming to a little bit.
I see.
Yeah. So we're coming to a little bit of an end of like snake history.
Yep.
And we are now going to jump into Malayo-Python reticulatus.
I jumped over the retic part of the Retic Lounge experience.
Right. But that's okay. You're excited. I'm excited. We're all excited. This is a good time.
I think this is just my favorite part of the chapter, so I'm just like excited to get to it.
Oh, me too. It really, it breaks things down really well. But I want to like emphasize now that we are going into the reticulated Python stuff. There's a lot of in-depth information here. Basically talking about the Malayo-Python clade and how they made their way into the Solaire Island chain. But in order to understand like how, and let me preface this again, for those of you that maybe missed it on the last episode or haven't, when Glen refers to the Solaire Island chain, we're referring to subspecies of Saputrai and Jampeanus. So the Solaire Island chain doesn't only just consider Solaire Island, but it also considers the Jampeanus subspecies, the Kalatoa, the Kayuwadi, all those other islands as well.
Yeah, all the stuff down in the Flores Sea.
Yeah, so in order to understand how pythons or Malayo-Python made their way to the Solaire Island chain, we need to understand, it's important to understand the events that occurred. So Nathan, go ahead and that's where you were about to start diving into.
So once they arrived to the Solaire Island chain, 2.58 million years ago, during the Quaternary period, the Sunda shelf oscillated between being flooded and exposed. For most of the period, sea levels fluctuated around 40 to 60 meters, or 130 to 200 feet below present day levels. With the exposure of the Sunda shelf, it gave way to Sundaland, a land bridge connecting Borneo, Sumatra, Java, and the Malay Peninsula, and is now partially flooded. Sundaland was a migratory location for the dispersion of flora and fauna to Asia and the Austro. Wow. I cannot read tonight, Lucas.
You were on fire last episode. You've said some really fancy, sexy words tonight. Well, but you're good. You're good.
Yeah. The Australo Papua during this period, Sundaland was permanently subaerial during the early and mid Pleistocene?
Pleistocene is how
Pleistocene?
I got that. Sure. Bless you.
Thank you. This period of Sundaland being permanently exposed allowed for widespread migration. The migration through Sundaland eventually led to the creation of such lines as the Huxley, Lydecker, Wallace, and Weber lines, which are used to explain differences seen in Wallace's flora and fauna, where the boundary between Asia flora and fauna and the Australian flora and fauna sits.
Right. So, Nathan, you cool if I kind of summarize that into like a little bit more?
Well, it's on the map too, so that's why we have the map up. It shows the Wallace line, the Weber line, and the Lydecker line.
I really like. So I first heard about those different distinctions and those lines of evolutionary processes. Rodney Bolich on his Patreon channel did a really good video kind of explaining it, and he kind of gave his shots and guesses as to like where different localities fell within that those different evolutionary lines, but let me kind of real quick like back up and just kind of like explain a little bit more. So when we talk about how they got to the Solaire Island chain, let's talk first about the sun to shelf, which is what Nathan was reading. The sun to shelf was a continental shelf that was comprised of Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and peninsular Malaysia. So as you guys are if you guys are familiar with retic and locality retics, you know that retics are found in Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, right? Now that was a big, so that's kind of where Malayo-Python, from my understanding, where they resided a lot in. And then the second term to be familiar about is known as, let me see my notes instead of reading the book, is the Sundaland. So Sundaland was a land bridge that connected basically the sun to shelf and the other areas of Borneo, Sumatra, Java, and the Malay Peninsula. So again, all of those having retics, but essentially what happened 2.58 million years ago is there was a period where the water would rise and the water would go down. And as the water would go down, it would create this bridge, Sundaland. And that bridge was a main driving factor of the migration of these species to spread into the other parts of Asia at the time. So that's when they really, like, I guess this is the first explored migration period of Malayo-Python reticulatus. And they were able to spread super wide. However, Nathan, your face. Dude.
I'm just being a child and so unprofessional.
It's amazing. Oh, I was so happy you did that. I forgot I had a beer open. Thanks for reminding me. But as you guys can probably imagine, the water did not stay at a low level with Sundaland being exposed for forever. Clearly, because we have all these tiny little islands right now. And so I think so in the book it says 14,650 years ago, rapid global sea rise occurred, which was caused by the Eurasia ice sheet collapse. So there was a massive ice sheet that collapsed that caused a massive and very rapid level of global sea rise. Can you imagine, Nathan, how big an ice sheet needs to be for it to collapse and it cause global flooding?
We have it happening.
Yeah, I guess it's happening. I guess in our minds it's happening slowly, but
yeah, I mean, even in this, it took time for all of this sea level change to occur. It's not just like overnight, we're seeing drastic rises, but over a good period of time.
That's a good point, because in my mind, when I read that, I was like, damn, this ice sheet collapsed and then just the world flooded. Like, just like, right? Like, I'm thinking like when you add
Noah's Ark
cubes.
Style.
Yeah, like, or when you add ice cubes in your water after you fill the water glass and it always just overflows.
I don't think it's like a displacement thing.
No. Probably happens, yeah, like you said, over many years.
Yeah.
So what...
I'll look for it, but I believe it says somewhere in here.
Yeah, so essentially why I'm talking about this really cool collapse is because you have to imagine, as the seafloor level is really low and these animals are able to migrate so many regions in this part of the world, there's this land bridge, right, Sundaland, and then all of a sudden the water starts to rapidly increase. You end up getting retics that are landlocked. They become landlocked in the areas that they're inhabited, and because the water rose so high, there is no longer land connecting these now islands in which these snakes now exist on and cannot move from. Man, and we're not even close yet, but this is what excites me about Insular Dwarfism, which is chapter 4. Anyways, any thoughts on that? That last piece right there, landlocking.
No, not too much. I like what you added. What did I mark down for this?
I do have I marked down read page 41, paragraph 2.
Yep, I have that whole paragraph outlined.
Yeah. Go for it. Or do you want to give me a stab at reading?
I would much rather you take over the reading for right now. I don't know what's gotten into me.
All right. So again, if you guys are following along, we're on page 41, paragraph 2. So what I'm about to read is in regards to the proposed migration route for MR Jampeanus. So I'll go ahead and read. So what I mean by that is this is the idea of how Malaeopython reticulatus Jampeanus got to where they are. This is the proposed migration route. So
I know what's exciting to me, and this is totally off. Well, it's not totally off topic. It's about the book.
We also want to thank VivTech Products for being an affiliate sponsor of the Retic Lounge. Stop by VivTech Products for the best UV spectrum lighting on the market that will enhance and improve your snake's overall well-being and health. Visit vivtechproducts.com and use the code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Again, visit vivtechproducts.com and use our affiliate code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off.
Looking for the perfect accessories for your hatchlings or juvenile retics? Look no further than Heli Guy Serpents. Our sponsor, Chris Sexton, is coming in hot with an amazing 3D printer, creating top-notch perches and other caging accessories for your beloved pets. Enrich your retics environment with their high-quality products. Use our promo code TRL10 for a 10% discount on your purchase. Visit them today at heliguyserpents.com and start giving your pets the best. Heli Guy Serpents, the premier source for 3D printed caging accessories. Again, that's www.heliguyserpents.com and use our promo code TRL10 for 10% off all of your 3D printed accessories today.
What?
You know how Glenn said that this has been his nightmare for the last little while?
Mm-hmm.
I've caught 2 different typos through this. And one's in this next sentence that you're about to read.
Okay.
Let's see if you catch it.
I probably won't, but traved.
There you go.
Travid. Damn it, Glenn.
But I read traveled when I first read it.
Me too. Okay, so the current proposed migration route for MR Jampeanus is that an ancestral MR reticulatus traveled down through the Sundaland Bridge to the Lesser Sundas, and then to certain islands in the Solaire Island chain, like Tana Jampea, Palua Kayawati, Palua Madu, through the Flores Seas. Ayulia et al., so that's a research that's being cited in an article or a published journal, proposed that during the Pleistocene, with the isolation of Tana Jampea from Lesser Sundas, the 2 populations of reticulated pythons became distinct from one another. The authors proposed that the migration route of MR Saputrai is from Sundaland to southwestern Sulawesi via the Makassar Strait and then to Palua Solaire, Tambalongan, and Polasi through the Solaire Strait. Separation of Palua Solaire from southwest Sulawesi occurred around the late Cretaceous or early Tertiary. So if you kind of, just to rewind a little bit, Glenn is talking about the different migration patterns that resulted in MR Jampeanus and MR Saputrai. And if you look at the idea of what happened, it kind of makes sense because you see that MR Saputrai does not only relate to Tambalongan and Solaire, but also has animals from Sulawesi. So pretty interesting that there's a theory or idea that even scientists and then the author kind of takes it a step further to kind of map out the Sundaland and where the bridge was to create the two different subspecies that exist today.
And all just through different migratory paths. So that's cool.
Right. So, and Glenn goes on to explain that this makes sense given the degree of relation between MR Saputrai and South Sulawesi and the insular MR Saputrai population on Solaire Island. So like I said, if you look at a Solaire, you look at even a Tambalongan, and then you look at a Sulawesi in the southwestern area, they got that blunt nose, orange and yellow coloration with thick blacks. Like they all look very much alike. And likewise, the degree of separation between insular MR Saputrai populations and MR Jampeanus populations makes sense because of the differing proposed migration routes. They are geographically close. Gene flow between MR Saputrai and Jampeanus has been prevented due to strong directional surface currents in this region. So it's and we're going to get into this with Insular Dwarfism a little bit, but
their migration modes.
Yeah, their migration modes, how they did that, all those different things. But the currents in the seas where Solaire is and then like to Kalatoa are so strong that it's very unlikely that they are able to actually swim to those other islands, which is why they created those two different subspecies. Actually, I'm just kidding. That's actually in this chapter. I have it highlighted.
What is? Sorry.
So it talks about. So this is a part where I actually wanted to talk a little bit about some of the debate that's out there. Excuse me. Okay.
About how they migrate.
Yeah, because I think even early on when I started keeping retics, and a lot of what people told me and everything is that these snakes very well, like the Superdorf island chains very well. The snakes swam to these smaller islands, right?
That's what I was told. Two things. I was told they swam and that hurricanes or cyclones. Yeah.
I always found it hard to believe that they could swim, and I remember Daniel Solis talking about the currents and like just although the islands look close apart, it's pretty vast, and maybe the idea of them swimming doesn't really make logical sense. But so Glenn writes on here, it is hypothesized that retics migrate to remote islands by swimming, rafting, or are displaced by tropical cyclones. When discussing the migratory mechanisms of reticulated pythons, it's important to consider that it is more likely that island populations of reticulated pythons started as non-insular populations, meaning that at one point they were no longer, at one point they weren't on an insular island, but that they were on a mainland that they eventually became landlocked because of the rise of sea level. However, I think it's really cool on here, and this goes into the volcano story that I really loved on here. It is important to note that reticulated pythons have migrated to new islands that were previously uninhabited, and there are different examples that he kind of outlines. And Nathan, do you have any notes on Krakatau Island?
Yeah, all reticulated pythons on the Krakatau Island since 1908 are the result of a recolonization. On August 26th and 27th of 1883, Anak Krakatau erupted after 3 months of activity. The explosion was heard from over 4,800 kilometers away, or 3,000 miles, at Rodrigues Island, an island east of Madagascar. It is considered the loudest sound recorded in modern human history.
That's pretty wild.
What was your first visual when reading this? Like hearing this eruption event could have been part of the recolonization of some of these animals. Like, did you get a visual in your head?
I mean, I saw a massive kaboom, and I saw a bunch of lava forming islands that eventually turn green and are inhabited. But the only visual that I saw when I read the part that said it was the loudest recorded sound in history, I just imagined like a mountain and this eruption happening, and literally the volcano like basically being cut in half because of how massive the explosion must have been.
It made me think of the underwater volcano that erupted 4 or 5 years back. And then also like the visual in my head as I was reading that and thinking of, these animals being displaced because of this eruption was just snakes flying through the air. And like, okay, just plop down on an island.
Right. What's up? No, but what's really cool is that they were repopulated on that island. But what's interesting is that after that massive explosion, they spread to other islands that were nearby, but still kind of far, like Rakata Island, Sertung Island. And the only likely hypothesis on how they got there, other than snakes flying in the air from an eruption and somehow surviving and landing on these tiny islands, was by swimming. So it is possible, even with vast distances, that these reticulated pythons can absolutely swim. And I think that there are important noted examples of when it's more possible than not. But I'm going to have to say, I think I agree with the book in the sense of those that are on Kalatoa, Kayuwadi, Madu, all those. I think those were more of a landlocked scenario. But yeah, I just find it insane how this massive explosion led to a recolonization of these animals on islands where retics never existed.
Yeah. And I mean, the survey they did was only some 25, 30 years later. That eruption happened in 83, and then in 1908 they did a zoological survey of the islands, and that's when they were finding reticulated pythons.
Yeah. I also want to just add on here that on page 44 it says it should also be noted that Indonesian seas are well known for their strong tidal currents. This adds further credence to the belief that swimming is a common means of dispersion for reticulated pythons, as they are assisted by the current. Now, so there was a little quote here. So Indonesian seas are a mix of complicated coastal geometries with narrow straits and myriad small islands, rugged bottom topography next to wide shelves of shallow water, and large quantities of tidal power input from the adjoining Indian and Pacific Oceans, which all combine to form a complex system of interfering three-dimensional waves. So, sure, absolutely, it seems like it's plausible and possible for these instances to happen with waves and currents. I'm almost wondering, I guess, what the current and stuff looks like in some of those, the dwarf and super dwarf retics that we're going to be getting into next chapter.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of the waves, and this is how I wrote it down in my notes, but snakes in boats. And not only in boats, but piloting their own boats or the captain of their own boats.
Right.
This is a migratory method that it doesn't totally shock me. Seeing some snakes in the water growing up, being in lakes and stuff, but rafting.
Right.
So rafting is another method proposed for reticulated pythons to migrate to remote islands. Using kelp, driftwood, pumice, or other buoyant materials, animals can be transported across long distances by rafting on these objects, hence the name. It is a well-documented phenomenon seen in eastern diamond-backed rattlesnakes, boa constrictors,
I just picture a rattlesnake with its tail up, just like hitchhiking.
Well, one of the snakes that I saw, it wasn't rafting, but it was floating in Lake Powell, was a rattlesnake.
Yeah. No, they can flatten their body and they just kind of just float along.
Yeah. Orinoco crocodiles. Probably not saying that right. New Caledonian geckos. Let's see. For terrestrial taxa, rafting can be seen as the predominant mode of water-based dispersal. Given the historical precedent, rafting is yet another possible explanation of how reticulated pythons have dispersed to remote locations. So that kind of uses the currents to their advantage, and they're not having to tax their body as much. I think, you know
what I think of? I think of going to the San Marcos River and going tubing with a cooler and a beer and just letting the river take me down while I drink beer.
Yeah, but I feel like that's a little bit more of a choice. I don't think a retic ending up on a piece of driftwood or a piece of kelp accidentally is necessarily a choice, right? Like, I don't think these animals are necessarily trying to get away, and Glenn does mention this.
Hear me out.
In the chapter.
Important question. We're talking about choice. I talk about going down the river, and I'm going tubing, and I'm drinking beer, and it's just taking me. If retics could choose their number one beer to drink, what would it be? What would a retic choose as its go-to beer?
I'm trying to see how you're being clever here. I don't know, Lucas. What beer would this retic
No. There's no pun here. I don't even know yet. I'm just asking you. Like, if a retic, like, we talk about their personalities, we talk about all this stuff. Like, what would a retic?
Oh, you're just saying, what are they cracking open on the boat?
What's their choice? I'm curious what you would think.
As a man who came from a boating family, I can confirm that cracking a beer on the boat is just common courtesy.
It is. If you go on a boat ride without a beer, shame on you.
Well, let's think. We have to think regional, right? Because they're not just going to have, like, I don't know, a Rainier out there, right?
I mean, yeah, we could go like that deep into it, but I mean, if I'm thinking like regional, I'm wondering. Oh, Nathan cut out again. Damn it. All right. So while I have you guys here alone without Nathan, what would a retic choose to drink? Would it be Heineken? Would they like an IPA? Sorry, Nathan, I was talking to the listeners.
No, these retics are not.
Oh, jeez.
They're not drinking IPAs.
Oh, change your mic. That sounds horrible.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's...
Gosh, you rookie. Yeah, I don't think IPA either. It's a little too hipster, even though I'm drinking an IPA now, but it's like a really good classic. It's Lagunitas. Really good.
Yeah, they don't have that over in in the Stundaland area, right? So
what I did say before, like Heineken, although that's not, I don't, if you know a beer that they drink in Indonesia, like off the top of your head, I'd be really impressed.
Not off the top of my head, but off the top of Google's head. They are going to be drinking, wait for it, Bourbon Tang.
That sounds kind of German too, and that's where the first python fossil was found.
Okay, well, we'll
go with that.
Frost.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about. Well, Nathan, why don't you talk about? I want to read a little bit on another method, but do you want to talk about tropical cyclones?
Yeah. So
could you imagine just like hurricane winds just flinging snakes?
Again, another visual of snakes just flying through the air and plopping down on an island. But yeah, another method of reticulated pythons being displaced is by tropical cyclones. It's a I'm pretty sure everyone knows what a cyclone is, but we'll dig into it. It's a meteorological phenomenon that originates over tropical oceans and
Nathan's in timeout. Son of a gun. I'll read it. All right. So a tropical cyclone is a meteorological phenomenon that originates over tropical oceans and is driven principally by heat transfer from the ocean. You're in timeout, Nathan. Mute yourself. Tropical cyclones occur frequently in the seas of Southeast Asia. In 1973, the deadliest known tropical cyclone in the southern hemisphere occurred, called the 1973 Flora cyclone. It killed 1,653 people. That's a lot of people. So the cyclone came directly through the range of MR Jampeanus. Not only do tropical storms frequently occur in the range of M. reticulatus, but they are also known to transport animals. So basically the air currents where these cyclones are picking up, they will lift organisms quickly, carry them great distances. As such, it is widely recognized mechanism facilitating the successful colonization of remote islands. So it is possible, I guess. I'm not gung-ho about that theory, but it's possible. Nathan, you back?
I'm back. I'm just really mad at my little connection piece that I'm using. So as we go through this, I am replacing it.
Okay, fair enough.
Yep.
But one of my favorite methods of transportation, Glen outlines that reticulated pythons were not solely responsible.
I said they're not only captains of boats, Lucas.
Yes, they ride them, and they hitchhike, and in a uniquely anthropogenic phenomenon, they were frequent stowaways on ships, with one account detailing how the snakes were transported in ships from port to port, one landing in Rangoon, another found on Bombay by way of Moulmein, and finally to London, where it ended up at the London Zoo. Likewise, at the turn of the 20th century, there were reports of reticulated pythons in southern China, which is out of their natural range and are believed to have been captive specimens transported into China by humans, probably for pest control on ships. So just you got a retic just chilling out in the open.
Yeah, just taking care of the rats and living alongside the crew.
Yeah. I find that just man, what a life back then. You're just exploring the wide open oceans, taking a bunch of stuff to other countries, and you just got retics in there taking care of the rat. Could you imagine like stepping down into like the what's it called? The part of the boat that, has the like where it runs. Anyways.
The poop deck.
Yeah,
that's where it runs.
The poop deck. But just like finding a retic wrapped on like rats. I see like a retic like eating one while it's wrapped around another one. But let's close up chapter 1. And I want to read the final paragraph of the book, or of the chapter, I should say. In total, the dispersal of MR Jampeanus and MR Saputrai dates back at least 167 million years and continues to this day. From the origins of Serpentis to reticulated pythons to MR Jampeanus and MR Saputrai, they survived against the odds and have remained ever since. When an ancestral M. reticulatus traveled down through the Sunderland Bridge to the Lesser Sundas and then populated certain islands in the Solaire Island chain, MR Jampeanus in its current form began. Since then, they have dramatically reduced body size in response to their environment, creating the subspecies that we know today. And speaking of reduced body size, chapter 4. Chapter 4.
Insular Dwarfism.
Right. So
starting off with the quote, "Islands are where species go to die."
That's a pretty badass quote. David Quammen.
Yeah, David Quammen, 1996.
So real quick before we jump into this chapter, I love this chapter because it really dives deep into the history and the study of insular dwarfism. Man, we're going to get into the debate that's happened within the community in regards to if superdwarf or dwarf retics are even a thing, because at the end of the day, they're retics and they'll get big and all these different things. I was surprised to see how much science and how much research is out there and how many different examples in the same area. Thanks for taking that down, by the way. How many different...
I realized I had a couple things coming up, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's still up." But
we should probably put that down.
Still, I mean, it's still good to reference as far as all the migration that we were just talking about. So it's not bad that it was up.
Right. So first and foremost, I definitely I'll give Nathan a stab to see if his connection will hold to read to read the second paragraph of the first page of chapter 4, which is on page 49. But Insular Dwarfism is what made M.R. Jampeanus and M.R. Saputrai, which we term as dwarf and superdwarf reticulated pythons. And it explains why these snakes remained small throughout their evolutionary process. So I want to talk real quick about the heated debate in the community. Nathan, I don't know if you remember when I was on Facebook and everything, and this was early on, probably in 2017 and 18, I would see so many people argue and try to, and even in 2020 and maybe even later, I don't want to throw a group of retic keepers and breeders under the bus, but I saw a lot of rhetoric from the mainland community bashing at the idea that they were actually superdwarf and dwarf retics because they were able to get a handful of Jampeas up to 15 feet or 16 feet and get Salayers up to that size too. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that time?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, and there was a little bit of a power feeding era during that time.
Right. I mean, I think everybody was out to disprove the dwarf and superdwarf stuff, so they started massively pumping them with food. And so I think that this chapter covers that, as well as goes into the actual history of what is insular dwarfism. So
my first note on this chapter, though, and this is for you, Glenn, is another typo. First paragraph, at the end of the first paragraph, it says size is that, and there's no space. Just to drive you a little bit more crazy. Love you.
He's not gonna come on for one of these episodes.
He will. He loves me.
To explain the lighting aspect of things, he's gonna be like, no, screw you guys. Nathan, read that second paragraph if you don't mind. That really dives deep into what insular dwarfism is.
It goes by many names. There's insular dwarfism, phyletic dwarfism, island dwarfism, the island rule, Foster's rule, the island effect, etc. While the names are different, they generally refer to the same process. Regardless of the name, insular dwarfism is a well-documented phenomenon in scientific literature and extends to taxa far beyond M. reticulatus. Notable examples include mammoths, sloths, raccoons, foxes, and even early hominids. Let's see.
Time and time again.
Yeah, he had a bunch of references there that I felt we could skip over. You should read them. Time and time again, when subjected to resource-limited conditions, the body of certain fauna will often reduce in size. This is something I wanted to highlight in this chapter, is actually this third little paragraph, Lucas. So go for it, and I'll pull them up.
Yeah, so I have a lot of detailed information on the two different examples, and I debated whether I was going to want to go into depth about these two different examples, but as I continued reading through the chapter, it clearly demonstrated that it was an important note to hit on. But real quick, before I even read that, I just want to say it was a very wise decision for you to not read the scientific name of all those animals. I would have butchered them.
Yeah.
Raccoons.
Mammothus criticus.
That's an easy one. That also
I
sounds
chose
like
an easy one on purpose, Lucas.
that sounds like a Harry Potter spell.
Yeah.
Mammothus what is it?
I'm playing
Criticus.
T-ball over here. I chose the easy one.
Right. But yeah, so let's talk about outside of MR reticulatus. Let's talk about two examples of insular dwarfism that exist. And what's important about them existing in this third paragraph is that they occurred in the same area that Saputrai and Jampeanus exist in. And I think what's important about that aspect is that it provides further validation that there was more than just retics that were experiencing insular dwarfisms in the same region. So two different ones. There were the H. Floresiensis. Damn it. Floresiensis. Yes. And SF insularis are both well-known examples from the literature on island dwarfism that happens to occur on the same island, Flores, approximately 75 miles excuse me, from the Solaire Island change. Interestingly, both Homo floresiensis and Stegodon florensis insularis were excavated at the same location. So, real quick, H. Floresiensis is Floresiensis is a whatever. It does not look like Floresiensis.
No, I know. I need it right in front of me. It's
Floresiensis. Gosh, science is dumb.
Floresiensis.
That sounds good.
Floresiensis.
Okay,
We'll go with that.
Floresiensis. Yeah. So H. floresiensis is a hominid, which is, I guess, what we could closely try to describe as like close to humans.
And we're talking insular dwarfism.
Right. So hold on. I got a cool reference on this in a second.
Okay.
Maybe not. It's pretty dumb. And then Stegodon florensis is referring to a like species or relation to elephants. So let's talk a little bit about the Hobbit people.
Not the Hobbit elephants to start.
Not the Hobbit elephants, the Hobbit people.
I just think they sound so cool.
I mean, they do. I would love a Hobbit elephant. But Hobbit people, I found that it was funny that they're referred to as Hobbit people. And what interests me into doing a book club about this is I'm reading Lord of the Rings and obviously Hobbits, right? And I was like, wait, science actually acknowledges and coins a nickname of Hobbit people? I thought that was pretty funny. But again, just Nathan, I don't know how much you were wanting to like read verbatim on stuff on this, but essentially, again, in the same area, Flores, there were these hominids that were discovered that were drastically smaller in size than other hominids in the surrounding mainland islands around these. So we're talking about a more human-like example, not just snakes and not just reptiles, but mammalian in nature, closely or somewhat closely related to us, that also were dwarf. That's pretty cool.
And I thought it was cool that they were able to excavate both in a single place.
Right. So imagine these little people riding little elephants. That's what I see. Stepping on little retics. But yeah, so there was a in 2003 when archaeologists dug 6 meters down into the ground is when they found these dwarfed hominids, and it created it discovered that's where these fossils were found. And prior to that, in earlier excavations, they only dug 3 meters. So they dug 3 meters deeper than that, and they found these individuals. And so they're known as floresmen, or like I said, hobbits. Now, I do want to just share with this that it's a controversial and shrouded in lies, trickery, and deceit, according to Gross 2007.
Isn't all science?
Yeah, lies, deceits, and
When it comes to like really old sciences like this, it's like no one agrees with anyone, it seems like.
no. But what they ended up finding, and what there is little to agree upon, is that these hobbits, is that the anatomically primitive hominin whose precise phylogenetic relationship to other species of early Homo remain unresolved, though they are likely descended from Indonesian Homo erectus that lived on Flores Island approximately 60 to 100,000 years ago, likely went extinct around 50,000 years ago, which, by the way, that's not that long ago, and are most known for their dramatically reduced body size compared to other hominids. The Flores man is thought to have stood 106 centimeters or 41.7 inches and weighed between 16, well, I guess let's use pounds, 35 to 63 pounds.
Just a little guy.
Little hobbit.
Just a little guy.
I think of Frodo. It's great. So when you compare them to other hominids, such as Homo habilis and Homo erectus, they were massively smaller. And so what's interesting about this is that while many explanations have been offered regarding the mechanisms responsible for those hominins' small body size, the researchers who discovered the Flores man, or LB1, offered insular dwarfing as being the strongest candidate. And that research was published in 2004. They believe that the dwarfing seen in LB1 may have been the end product of selection for small body size in low calorific environments, either after isolation on Flores or another insular environment in southeastern Asia. So, does that sound familiar for what the general community believes is why these retics are smaller? Is because maybe a deficit in caloric intake?
That's one thing that we generally agree on.
Right, one thing that the retic community can agree on. So, Nathan, go into the baby elephant.
Ooh, let's see. Where are we at here?
Page 51.
Oh, yeah. Stegodon florensis insularis is another prime example of a dwarf species on Flores Island that has been extensively studied.
Wait. I wanted to make note.
Yes,
I'm so sorry. Guys, if you're following along, page 50, at the very top of the page is a picture of a hobbit cave.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. That's the site where they were
they were found. Yeah, so they not only were they called hobbits, but they also lived in caves. I thought that was cool. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. Let's see. Where was I? So Stegodon florensis insularis is another prime example of a dwarf species on Flores Island that has been extensively studied due to its relationship with hominins. Stegodon is an extinct genus related to modern elephants. SF insularis is believed to be a direct descendant from Stegodon florensis, a larger stegodon found on Flores Island dating back to the early Pliocene and early Middle Pliocene. The mechanism proposed that led to dwarfing of SF insularis was primarily was the lack of other large or medium-sized herbivores on Flores Island. So there's just nothing competing with its food.
Yeah.
And then a response to limited resources, a lack of top order mammalian carnivores, the demographic advantages of having an accelerated reproduction and shortened gestation period, and more effective thermoregulation, which led to a body size reduction of more than 30% compared to the original colonizing stegodon population.
That's pretty drastic. 30% smaller.
Yeah. I mean, what's the percentage smaller of humans? I mean, it's got to be over 30%, right? Yeah, that's over I would say over 50%.
Yeah.
Most humans are over 120, right? I don't know what the average weight of humans on the planet is, but it was saying that the Hobbit people there that they excavated from that. You said it so much that I just reverted to it.
That's great.
Well, we have a place here in Utah called Hobbitville, so it's just natural for me.
So I just kind of want to just again summarize and why we're going into and how we're not talking about retics right now.
We're talking about insular dwarfism, though.
Yeah, we're talking about insular dwarfism, and I think it's also important for us to acknowledge the different examples of insular dwarfism to like just further validate that this isn't
some of the earliest recorded versions of insular dwarfism on those islands
in the same area. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it just validates that it's also possible within the snake species, and this isn't just a bro science of people just trying to make sense of of like retics being smaller, right? Like there's a lot of sales tactics going on in retics, but as we dive in more into this chapter, it only solidifies and strengthens the insular dwarfism reason for why these animals are smaller. So I wanted to kind of go into a little bit on the reticulated pythons and their arrival date of
Lucas, we have this picture up of both the dwarf hominin and the dwarf elephant. Were they riding them into battle?
Absolutely. And it was against the larger hominids that tried to take over the island.
The reason they are found together, they are actually found with tools that suggested they are butchering these for food.
Fair. I mean, and because they're herbivores, that's grass fed right there. That's grass fed elephant.
Good eating.
That's great eating. Actually, I take that back. I don't mean that. I won't ever eat an elephant, guys. I don't want to look like I'm Jason's Deli. What's the dude that likes to kill cheetahs and elephants?
Oh, that's Freaky Fast. What's that? Jimmy John's.
Jimmy John's, yeah. Fuck that guy.
Publicly.
Okay, so let me get into the bottom of page 52 real quick. So there we go. Okay.
Yeah. No, that was a fumble on my end.
So I mean, just to kind of summarize, is that there's no evidence to support that retics existed on these islands at the same time as the hobbits and the dwarf elephants. I don't know why that's funny. But I think what's important, and I highlighted here to read some into at the bottom of page 53. So while entire books could have been written about about the hobbits, when focusing on M.R. Jampeanus and M.R. Saputrai, the proximity of their respective ranges is a primary focus. As Wallachia is a biodiversity hotspot, it is no surprise to see many ecological important fossils and extant species in the area. What is more surprising is how insular dwarfism and gigantism have been observed in the area. I'm excited to talk about gigantism a little bit because I don't think that a lot of people think about that, but because
when talking about retics, they don't think about gigantism.
Well, no, I mean, they just call them mainlands, right? They're just mainlands. Because this region is home to tens of thousands of islands, it is no surprise that the body size of fauna adapted to their environment. Still, what is puzzling to most scientists is how these different species came to these different islands. Though the previous chapter explored the migration patterns in great detail, the presence of S.F. insularis and H. floresiensis in such proximity to
Floresiensis,
thank you. In such proximity to M.R. Jampeanus should further solidify that the reduced size of M.R. Jampeanus is mostly due to the mechanism of insular dwarfism rather than other factors like a growth hormone deficit or drift as a sole factor. So let's get back into the macro, right? So the big picture view of the subject, the term island rule. So if you guys remember at the very beginning of the chapter, we talked about different terminology for insular dwarfism, and one of them was island rule, and that was coined in 1973 by Dr. Lee Van Valen in his paper entitled Pattern and the Balance of Nature. So I want to read a little bit about like what this paper had, but in that paper, Van Valen references the seminal work of Dr. J. Bristol Foster. Evolution of Mammals on Islands was the published paper that was coming out. Now, guys, you guys are wondering, like, why am I referencing this kind of crap? It's because it's research that has been done extensively on insular dwarfism. It's important to understand that this isn't people just saying like, oh, less food, small island, smaller things. But Foster's book, so in it, Foster introduced a concept that Van Valen would name the island rule 9 years later. So again, island rule, that it basically launched a wide-reaching exploration in the scientific community to better understand how the body size of fauna adapts in insular environments. So there were over 116 species that were assessed, how their body size differed from island to their mainland counterpart. And he discovered that certain island fauna shrank in body size while others increased. This finding laid the basis for island dwarfism and island gigantism. I haven't read into island gigantism ever, Nathan, and so this was my first introduction to it, and I found it extremely fascinating. And it makes sense with retics.
It does, but this work wasn't explicitly addressed for snake insularity.
Yeah, I don't think there was a snake in the entire, like out of the 116 species.
It was years later that it was worked into Serpentis.
Right, exactly. But if it's okay with you, do you want to talk about so gigantism?
Yeah, so let's see.
I have a note on the bottom of page 54 with the lizard.
Yeah, I have that here. I just want to see where I want to start. Sorry. Foster references other squamata saying that insular lizards are generally recorded as larger, and it's particularly difficult to assess if smaller body size taxa are their primitive forms or insular adaptations. One such example of an insular lizard that exhibits gigantism is the Skyros wall lizard, whose increased size is driven by increased abundance and consumption of prey available compared to their mainland counterparts. While often mentioned as the quintessential example of insular gigantism in lizards, Komodo dragons, based on phylogeny, are not actually island giants. Rather, they belong to a genus called Varanus, which includes the similarly large size crocodile monitor. The extinct Varanus prissus is thought to have grown to lengths up to 7 meters or 20 feet, making that the extant V. komodensis not an island giant when the body size of other members of the genus are considered. Do you want me to keep going?
No. So, I mean, I want to talk about right there. I think one important thing to note is like, even on smaller islands for smaller species like this lizard, because of the lack of competition and the abundance of food, that they actually get larger.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense for some of these like originally starting out smaller lizards to go to an island where just, you know, small bugs and the things that they're preying on are going to be a little bit more common, that they're going to be able to grow a little bit bigger, right? So,
right, exactly. Whereas the opposite is found for maybe some larger species in general, with there being more competition for food, and that's why maybe they might be smaller.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
It is.
So let me talk about gigantism real quick. You know, I want to discuss an argument that maybe some of these retics that are found on the islands of Sulawesi and Borneo, or Borneo, don't know why I said it with a French accent.
You didn't sound that stuck up.
Thanks. I'm wondering if, so I think when you look across the span of reticulated pythons and their average size, I think in the hundreds of islands that have them, I think that you're probably, and again, I'm going outside the book here, just for anybody who is listening. I'm going outside the book here, and I'm just talking about my thoughts. But the vast majority of retics have to be, on average, 12 to 15 feet, right? Maybe even at that 16-foot marker. And I'm wondering if on certain islands like Borneo and Sulawesi, where there's agriculture and there's farm and cattle and those kind of things, if that's contributing goats, right? If that's contributing to a result of gigantism. And, yes, retics historically, longest species of snake in the world, these massive animals, but it's very few and far between where we've seen these massive, massive, massive animals. And I'm wondering if
this kind of takes me though back to the history episode that we did with Glenn a while back, and noting that, the true giants that have been recorded in retics, like it seems like they were a little bit more frequent when the species was first being discovered. Like, do you remember that picture of the retic hanging from the rafters?
Yep.
Yeah, like I don't think we've seen modern pictures of retics that big.
Few and far between, right?
Right.
But yeah, I'm wondering if there is even gigantism within the reticulated python population based off of location and abundance of prey items, and really maybe the average length of reticulated pythons, they're not in that 20-foot marker, right?
Across the board average, absolutely not. Right.
So, and there's other factors. I just want to acknowledge other factors into that: longevity of life, survival. There's maybe all retics on a certain island can all get 20 feet if those retics were to just live to be 20 years old, right? But in the wild, that I think it's a great feat to be able to live that long when you have not only humans wanting to kill you, but there's other prey or other predators out there.
That and just encroachment on the land. There's a lot of agriculture on these islands, as we heard last week. So, just their area is shrinking.
Right. Absolutely. So we're about to come to a wrap of this chapter. I want to finish this chapter up, but I think that it's important for us to discuss the different influences most likely creating the dwarfism and associated so we've now been talking about insular dwarfism in broad, and now the book really starts to really talk about insular dwarfism and how it applies to MR Jampeanus and Saputrai. So I want to jump to page 58. And just start kind of on the top there. So no study, as of right now, has been conducted with the sole purpose of examining the mechanism behind the reduction in size seen in MR Jampeanus or insular MR Saputrai. Before I keep reading, I just want to pause at that snake in that picture on top, that wild-caught Kalatoa.
Yeah, you made it. I know.
No. He took that picture, but I do have that snake.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a cutie.
I thought you produced that animal.
No, that's a wild-caught animal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No, wild-caught.
You produced it, though, Lucas. Wild-caught from Lucas's lab.
I assisted in producing its most recent fecal sample.
Good job.
Yep, I feed it.
Claps for Lucas. That one hasn't been paired to anything though yet. You're just holding it for Glenn.
Yeah, so Glenn, I haven't paired it to anything yet, but this animal was with Eric Lee for a long time. This animal was with Garrett Hartle prior to Eric Lee, I believe, or after Eric Lee, and has consistently led to infertile clutches. So the theory with this animal, it's just not a fertile male. He is pretty old in nature. I got to look up his history again and talk to Glenn, but I'm pretty sure his import date was roughly like 16 years ago. So he's getting up there.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess my theory with Glenn and him moving to Florida is maybe with me keeping in ambient temperatures and my average temperature throughout the year being probably 82 degrees, maybe I'll get a little wiggle from his sperm as opposed to like an 88-degree hotspot. Who knows?
Get that microscope out, Lucas.
Right. Yeah. Oh, actually, I kind of want to get a microscope. A lot of people in the green tree python community have it, and they look at sheds under microscopes to determine male or female. Just a thought.
I've heard, or I thought maybe I've heard that you could do that, but
Yeah.
how?
So with green tree pythons, you really don't want to pop them, and when they're young, you still don't want to probe them. But obviously, you want
Is
to
it
know
the shed around the ventricle scale?
exactly. So if it has like a butterfly-like shape, it's a female. If it has like two little like you can see them very clearly in older animals, but in younger animals, if you put them under a microscope, you can see them much more detailed earlier on. Just cool, right? Just to have a microscope. But anyways, so back to explanation of insular dwarfism with MR Jampeanus and Saputrai. So because of that, to make conclusions on that mechanism, findings from similar papers must be extrapolated and applied to the subspecies. While it is not ideal, it is the closest path to understanding how these snakes became what they are today. So totally makes sense. No scientific studies have been done, so we can't make any 100% factual statements, but what we can do and what science often does is it takes similar studies with other species and applies it to a species that we're currently studying, which are reticulated pythons. So the most likely mechanism dwarfing MR Jampeanus and insular MR Saputrai is that through tens of thousands of years of genetic drift and selective pressures, this subspecies dramatically reduced in body size. Tens of thousands of years ago, when an ancestral M. reticulatus traveled down the Sundaland Bridge through the Lesser Sundas and rafted to the Solaire Island chain, the genesis of MR Jampeanus and MR Saputrai began. It is likely that multiple migrations events to these islands occurred multiple times during the Pleistocene, which is 2.58 million to million years ago to 11,700 years ago. And
quite a crazy range.
Right. And I mean, it just goes to show just how much the ocean floor was changing throughout those years constantly. So this would have introduced much needed genetic diversity to the endemic population and likely could account for some degree of phenotypic variation seen within populations on each island. So, for example, on individual islands, there are phenotypic differences such as size, head scale count, and pattern. So literally one island, different pattern, different head scale counts. Now, specifically on Palau Kalatoa, so referring to Kalatoas, some mature adult wild collected specimens in captivity were found approximately 1.5 meters in length, which, by the way, that specimen was recorded by Garrett, and others topped out at 3 meters, 10 feet in length, which was recorded by my wild caught that I have. This size variation aligns with in situ findings. So basically even stating that the range and the different of head scale counts and phenotypic expression still changes on a tiny, tiny island, which is why I tell people you can't just look at a snake you can't look at a super dwarf island and just tell what locality or what island it comes from, because there's so much difference and similarities within all the islands. So
absolutely, especially when you start looking at just like the super dwarf islands.
Yeah. Now, Glenn mentioned something on here that I have been saying multiple times on this podcast, which is us kind of reversing insular dwarfism at a rapid pace. So in captive settings, phenotypic plasticity is further heightened with controlled temperatures, constant access to clean, fresh water, and a high caloric diet. So reticulated pythons from Jampeanus have been observed to reach lengths of 5.6 meters, 18 feet in captivity, while on the island, they were found between 0.85 and 1.75 meters in length, which is only up to 5.74 feet. Now, I will say that the population sample size that they collected on Jampeanus was very small. There wasn't a lot of animals that they collected. So certainly on Jampeanus, there's snakes larger than 5 feet. But it's worth noting that in captivity, we were able to get these snakes to 18 feet. That's pretty.
You would think they would at least be able to find one of those big 18-footers out there if that were the case.
Right. It is likely, and this is something I talked to Glenn a lot about, and I've said a lot about, it is likely that the sizes of MR Saputrai and Jampeanus will likely to continue to increase in size in captivity, because we are basically providing them proper husbandry, right? You guys got to understand that these animals on these remote, tiny islands are literally just like surviving. And when they're in our care, they're thriving, right? So I truly believe that we are reversing insular dwarfism quicker than most people want to admit.
Yeah, I don't think a complete reversal can happen in our lifetime. I think you can see select examples of animals getting to the larger end of what you can push them to with just a crazy caloric intake. But yeah, one thing I wanted to highlight on the chapter is how insular dwarfism affects their gestation period.
Right.
So, MR Jampeanus eggs will gestate on average for 75 days, whereas MR reticulatus eggs will gestate on average for 85 days. This is all in artificial incubation. But it should also be noted that MR Saputrai, both insular and non-insular, appear to take even longer than that of MR reticulatus to incubate, often in excess of 90 days.
Yeah, my Solaire clutch took 91 days to hatch.
Yeah, so I just found that interesting. Different island conditions can even affect gestation over time.
Right. All right. To wrap up this chapter, let me go ahead and just kind of read this last paragraph at the bottom of the page that summarizes it up, kind of like I did with the last chapter. But all right. So bottom of page 61, in summation, insular dwarfism is a well-documented biological phenomenon with pertinent examples occurring in close geographic proximity to MR Jampeanus and MR Saputrai. This process drove the subspecies to the reduced body size it is today. While no study has been done to examine the specific dwarfing mechanisms for MR Jampeanus or MR Saputrai, based on similar insular taxa, it is likely that a mix of genetic drift and selective pressures, such as the size and abundance of prey items, ease of thermoregulation with decreased body size, phenotypic plasticity, and shortened gestation periods fueled the process. More research should be done regarding this mechanism, with special attention directed towards phenotypic plasticity due to the degree of body size changes and range seen in both captivity and their natural range. So again, that picture right there to the left on page 62, that's the wild caught that's in my garage right now that Glenn is holding. He's about 8 feet. Cute little fella. You're muted, bitch.
The really small body size on that little guy.
Yeah. All right. That wraps up chapter 3 and chapter 4. Considering that I read those chapters the day of and outlined them, this episode I think went way better than I thought it would.
Besides me not being able to talk the first half of the episode, yeah, it went okay.
And then going in and out.
Oh man, yeah, I'm gonna chuck this little USB adapter for my Mac out the window after this episode.
One thing that I did want to talk about, non-retic related, was my venture into bull snakes and Nathan.
Mm-hmm.
They're so cool. They're so cool. And that's all I'm going to say. But bull snakes are pretty damn cool.
I'm sure they're fun.
They just look at you and they see you in your soul, and they're always just like, you can tell when they're hungry. And the two that I have are
What does that remind me of?
kind of like a retic, but they don't lunge out of their enclosure for food though. They're kind of, they like sit and wait, and then when you give it to them, they bite it, and then they just start munching. They don't wrap. They just literally just inhale it. It's freaking nuts.
Yeah, it's like an indigo almost, but
Right.
you're dealing with Pituophis now. You're dealing with a whole new snake, new
cool.
species.
They're cool. Anyways, Nathan, do you have anything before we wrap up?
No. I'm honestly a little under the weather and a little exhausted, so my mind's a little foggy. So I'm gonna go get some rest.
All right, everyone, thanks for listening to our second segment of our book club of the Complete Reticulated Python. Again, shout out to Glenn and to Russ for putting together an awesome book. Again, final shout out to our Patreon members. We appreciate you all. And thanks for those of you that literally got the book just to follow along. We'll have the link in the description this time around for Amazon if you guys want to buy the book. And let us know what you think about these episodes in our comments. And we will see you guys next week for episode 113.
All right, see you next time.